data management plan tools and things like this. We heard John talk about funder mandates and stuff like that. Yeah, give me that. And then, so if we define data, so in my world, data is anything, any digital research output. So anything that is not a peer-reviewed article. So software code, data sets. In my own research, it was videos, lots of cells moving from one side of the screen to the other. That was my data. And if we talk about kind of the whole why now, if we look at where it all began with ARPANET, which was all about data package transfer, and so moving data around from one place to the other. And that's 1977, that's less than a generation ago of researchers. There's still people who are working on that who are working around today. And even if you go the next step, which is 1989 and Tim Berners-Lee and the internet, it came out of CERN because people wanted to move data. And who has data? Who creates all of this stuff? Institutions. The universities are creating all of this knowledge. It's probably the biggest R&D department in the world is academic research that's going on. And so the ability to share that, the ability to move that around is something that was very important. The fact that the internet came out of CERN is no surprise there. So who are the stakeholders and what are their motivations in this space if we're talking about? It's very much on the why now and why should we be making more of these outputs available? And as the technology is caught up, you can say all of these things, but then you look at what people's motives are and what of the stakeholders, what are their motivations and what does that mean they're going to do about it? So academics don't care. They are motivated to play in a system which rewards citations for publications. That's all they do, because you get 2 papers in Nature, you're going to get a career in academia. It's pretty simple. It's not an ideal situation. We can argue the pros and cons of that later, but that is how it stands today. So academics understand citations, and that is all they care. All they care about in a sweeping statement. Institutions, if we're talking about institutions in this space, we're talking about the libraries, right? And the IT departments. And you guys, I'm guessing, are pretty busy. I hear there's open access coming along and things like this. So you guys have enough on your plate. Publishers, their profit margins aren't dropping. Things seem to be working, right? So they're all good. Societies, again, often the opinions of older, whiter men who may have been about before all these changes in technology. The funders do have a motivation. They want a better return on investment for all the stuff that they do. And the government, they want to do good stuff, but they're very transient beings. So it's very hard to rely on who is going to make the decision that we need to be doing this with open data. And so we're starting to see it with funders, and I'll touch on that. So there's this other, I know I was very sweeping statement about academics are only caring about citations and careers at some point, because it's a very competitive landscape. But there's also this is from the Cordoma Foundation, it's this idea, right? How do we get further faster? We heard Timo talk about the 4th paradigm, and there's this idea, right? If this lab is working on something, and then this lab is doing something similar, and then they can build on top of that research, then they can build on top of that research, and this, in this idea, is a cure there. Then if any of these dotted lines break, then that line, that vertical line moves right, and that means delays to treatment. In this case, which is Cordoma Foundation, that means people dying because the drugs aren't getting there quick enough. And all it takes for those dotted lines to break, those dotted lines are an email from a researcher saying, hey, we're working on the same thing, can I see your data? I don't even have to respond. I don't even have to say no. That's enough for that to break. So the funders are thinking about this in this way, well, how can we get there further, faster? How can we turn this around? And we heard Timo talking about this. By the way, half of my slides for today have been touched on by other people. I had Ewan talking about academic incentives from the NSF, and I was like, right, cut that. So yeah, you may be familiar with the 4th paradigm. And so this idea is really that. It's not having to ask people for their data. How can we build on top of the data? How can we build on top of the research that's gone before? And why should we care now? Why would anyone care now? I said 1977 we were trying to do this. 1989 we had the technology, it was built for sharing data. Why is this all of a sudden important in 2015? In 2015, where we have blogs that have better diagnosis and interrogation of data than our academic journals. This is Nate Silver's 538 blog. If he makes some outlandish statements about political voting, you can interrogate the data, you can see what's going on. And now if we sweep over to academia and our article of the future, so Elsevier had an article of the future, and you can see, I was very excited when I saw this. They had a table, and they had this thing at the bottom, table options, and I thought this is going to be great, we can play around with this. So you can either download it, great, or you can view it in the workspace. I was excited about that. That basically means put it in the right-hand panel while you scroll. So it's not quite at the same point. So, but why would publishers care? We know Elsevier have got a good business model going. Why would they care about this? It's good that they're trying to do something. It's often the academics that are holding them back. And even more so, I don't know if anyone's familiar with the Scholarly Kitchen, which is the voice of conservatism in academia for me. And I feel like I can say that. We've got a colleague in digital science who's a chef, and he definitely is the voice of conservatism in digital science. So what do you think will have the biggest impact on scholarly publishing in 2015? The publication of data and objects like multimedia, application code, etc. What? Why now? Why today? These two words. I spoke about motivations for funders before. Who has the motivations? Why would they have an incentive to do this? And finally, the funders have got around to this point where they're saying, right, this is going very global very quickly. Neela Cruz of the, she's just sat down to the Vice President of the European Commission. She said for EU-funded research, we're going to have open access to papers and open access to the data too, and we're asking the national funding bodies to do the same. The national funding bodies, we're seeing it in Sweden, we're seeing it in Norway, they are starting to make these recommendations. In the UK, this is a digital curation center graph, and it's a lot of information. Basically, green circle means there is a policy or there is something there, and empty white circle means there's nothing there. So on the left-hand side, this is the main funders. Here's our policies. This is what you have to do. Yeah, we have a policy. And here's what we'll provide for you in terms of costs, data centers, things like this. You can see there's a lot more white circles on the right. So it's very much the funders telling you you have to do this, but we're not going to necessarily help you do it. And in fact, the EPSLC, which is one of the ones in the middle there, they said, you have to do this, and if we fund someone at your institution, the institution is responsible for having something for them. So in saying what are the stakeholders, you could always pass it up. The funders realized they couldn't pass it up to the government because the government could change. So they said, okay, we'll take on the mantle, immediately throw it at the institutions. So this is what's a very interesting space right now, and this is why it's a lot of questions coming along. Obviously, let's get to the US. The White House OSTP statement saying that requiring researchers to better account for and manage the digital data resulting from federally funded scientific research. So this is where it's getting interesting. And the HHS updated their policy a couple of weeks ago. They're updating it again in October. I'm going to whiz through this. If you want to catch me afterwards, I can talk about data management policies all day long. But the interesting one for this is the NIH. So there's a few funders here who fund a lot of people. NIH intends to make public access to digital scientific data the standard for all NIH-funded research, as well as doing other cool stuff with data. But the standard is a pretty strong word. And if in an amazing segue here, I pulled up some information from Uber Research because they're a great tool. And I actually just in that last talk, I looked and saw where Penn's funding came from. Sure you're aware, a lot of it comes from the NIH. And 22 billion in the last 10 years has gone out from the NIH. So they fund a lot of research. And they're saying that public access to digital scientific data is going to be the standard. And so this is my colleague Dan Ballon, did a representation of the US policies on this. And you'll see on the left-hand side, it's a very similar story, right? Left-hand side, policies, green filled in circles. Right-hand side, a lot more white spaces, a lot more of this, you have to do it. It's going to be the standard. We're not telling you how to do it. So, this is kind of this open academic tidal wave that I talk about quite a lot, which is this whole idea of point 6. So it starts with, it's papers and then data in each coupling. So number 1, recommended open access to papers. Number 2, recommended open access to all digital outputs of publicly funded research, data as I call it. Mandated open access to papers, mandated open access to data. Enforce mandated open access to papers, and enforce mandated open access to data. If you ask any funder, we've got one in the room I know, whether they think we'll get to point 6 in the next few years, I haven't had one say to me no. The NIH is saying it's going to be the standard. The UK, we just had May the 1st, the EPSRC funding policy came in that said, if we fund you, you have to put your data somewhere. So as of May the 1st, just a few weeks ago. And, but a few of the institutions missed the deadline. They said, well, they might get to number 4, but they're not going to get to number 6 anytime soon. And then when the EPSRC started saying at conferences that they were going to start checking on this in September of this year, people suddenly got very worried and started asking people could they implement a whole system in 2 months. So if you're an academic, this is you. You already have too many papers to read, you already have enough on your plate. I can't be bothered. I have another version of this slide, which is the librarian's point of view, which is just an avalanche of these academics coming at you, saying, what the hell are we supposed to be doing? And so you've got to think about them as well, right? Because, disclaimer, when I started Figshare, it wasn't for the good of academia. It was for me to get more credit for all of my research so I could go further in this academic pyramid scheme. And I got to the, I think I had a slide up. And it worked very well, obviously, as I'm no longer in academia. But it is true that 99.5% of UK PhD students, I don't have the stats in the US, sorry, do not make it to PI level. But a lot of them will tell you they think they can do. So you have to incentivize them, right? It's how, if you can give them something to put their data in, but what's going to incentivize them to do it? Metrics, credit for your research. And we can start with, again, segued in, altmetric.com tracks all Figshare DOIs. So I should say, by the way, Figshare is a platform where any academic can make any of their research outputs available online. We give them DOIs, we make them citable, we make them discoverable. We have an institutional offering, which I'll touch on in a moment. But everything that you make public through Figshare into the public space is tracked by Altmetric. It's tracked by all of the Altmetric providers, but the Altmetrics companies, but we use altmetric.com because it's the best one, so we pull in information from there as well. And this is some 3D dinosaur fossils, right? So you've got some 3D dinosaur fossils. Is that more important in your paper? Maybe not. But if you make it available at the same time that you make your paper available, as was the case with these 3D dinosaur fossils, the LA Times might write about you. They didn't necessarily write about your paper. They wrote about this because it's cool, because it's interesting, because you can 3D print out the biggest dinosaur that ever lived. It's using technology in a way that we never think to, but it makes us look really good. So that's some impact, right? You can say, hey, well, I've got the same amount of papers and the same amount of citations as my competitor, but he doesn't have the LA Times writing about his cool data, does he? Or she. We also, DataCite is where we get our DOIs. They track the number of clicks on each of the minters of DOIs, they call it. We mint DOIs for DataCite. We mint institutional branded DOIs on behalf of institutions. And you can see, just at with a red one, these data are publicly available, we're very discoverable. So if you're an academic, you want to get your content reused more than anybody else. So the discoverability is really important. The fact it's picked up on the altmetrics and tracked like that. But this is what it's all about, really, right? Citations. I want more citations than anyone else. So, and with our outreach, when we recently launched an institutional version of Figshare at Melbourne University, and this is what they wanted us to put on their flyers to hand out to the academics. It's not about you have to do this because your funders are making you do this. Australia doesn't even have those mandates coming through. They just want to get more impact than the other institutions in the area. So they're saying, get more citations. We The university has got this system, use this system, you get more citations. And you can see on Google Scholar these things are getting cited. So this was to raise the point about it's not uncontrolled, right? At the moment, this is a new space. I've talked about why this is a new space, but this is a new space for all of academia. And when institutional repositories came along, the institutional repositories are seen as a way that, is that going to affect the publisher model? We can make all of our papers openly available through the university, right? So we don't need publishers anymore. The publishers are going to go away. It didn't quite work out that way because people are so used to the publishing model that academics understand that that's the game they've got to play to get credit, get published in Nature, etc., etc. However bad that is, that's what they know. The data space is new. The data space is brand new. These are all publishing public journals that have come out in the last couple of years just to do with data, because they know that you as academics understand paper as the currency. So you have a data set, we'll put a paper wrapper around it, another paper. And this is as a direct result of mandates, because they know people are going to have to do this. Data in brief there is the Elsevier one. They came out in March, and in their press release they said, this is because of the White House OSTP mandate, and this is because the NIH has said that all genomics data needs to be made available. So good on Elsevier, hey? They're trying to help you out. There's also extra APCs that you'll pay the publisher for a second paper. But this is what it's about, right? Who's going to take control of this space? And so, as I said, we work with universities, because the universities are saying, hold on, well now, peer review hasn't been sorted for data. So what can we do if we're talking about why we're having to do this, what's happening in this space, and how we can grab hold of it? I think the IT department and the library are becoming very focal parts of the institution, because now they can control what goes out of the university as opposed to letting it go out and then control buying it back in. So we have these institutional setups, and I'm just going to spend the next 5 minutes talking about not necessarily just figshare and its institutional offering, but anybody who's building something or working in this space, what it needs to look like in order to be reused, in order to be a good system. And so this is an example of Monash University in Australia, another one in Australia where we've built a system for. They want to have, this is just all of the digital outputs of our institution. So here's all the posters, here's all the presentations, here's all the videos, here's all the code, here's all the spinning molecules. And essentially these portals can be one for the institution, and then you can have one for the biology department, and then you can have one for the lab. So you can have essentially an institutional repository for each of the, you can segment it as many ways as you want to. And this makes everything more discoverable. So to just touch on what the institutional offering looks like, we do 4 things. Everything that you upload is kept private until you choose to make it public. And so for us, it's not about, for the academics and for the university, it's not about open or closed data. Cassie touched on open science, and this is very much our background, making stuff openly available. But when we got into the institutional space, we realized very quickly it's all about control. The academics need to feel in control, the institution needs to feel in control of their research outputs, and it needs to not get in the way of workflows and add additional work. As I showed you that avalanche picture, everyone's too busy already. So research data management is the private space. The way it works is we are an app that lives in the cloud that helps you move your files around. So one of the first things we did when we came into this space, we said, hey, cloud storage, that's the way to go, right? That's great, and that's how the future is coming to reality. And then institutions said, no, we need to be in control. You need to do one thing very well, and that is an interface for better managing files and better tracking that impact. We are not in storage. So what we do is we plug into any storage system, and we want to make sure that every institution has this suite of tools. And we are not going to come in and say we do everything. We are going to do one thing nicely. And if in 5 years you need to pull us out, put something better in, we need to make that as simple as possible. So it's all about plugging into different systems, making sure these workflows all work nicely, and making sure that we make the data consistent the right way. So research data management, this is private management of files. Everything you upload, an academic signs in with Shibboleth. Everything they upload, We know about their how much space they have, all of these things, and they can choose. I can share it privately with Timo, and only Timo sees it. I can create a shared folder, and everyone in this room can access that data, but nobody else. Or I can make it publicly available. When I make it publicly available, it falls into that repository, that portal that I showed. So the second bit is that portal, the public-facing thing. The third bit is the administrative workflow portal, and this is all about managing how these things work, how these workflows work. If you have an institutional repository already that works for papers or for theses, then when people upload their files into the figshare system, they select, this is a paper. We can have it automatically pipe into your DSpace or your ePrints to make sure that they don't have to do things more than once. It's just a nice, easy interface for them. If you want curation, this happens a lot. Institutions say we don't trust our PhD students. So when they go to make their files publicly available, it's going to go to a librarian who says, this hasn't got the right funding information in. This hasn't got the right embargo policy on this. All of these things. And then reporting dashboard is all about those alt metrics, those citations, the impact your research as an institution is having. But can also tell you how much data your university has. Where does it live? How many of these collaborations are going on? You might have 500 collaborations going on with Harvard right now, but you won't find out until the papers come out and you can see the authors' associations. We can tell you that beforehand because we can see that shared folder that I talked about before, where it's kept private just to us. We can tell you who's working with who. Just on the administrative level, this is the administrative portal. The way this works is you can set things at a group level. So if you have a group structure, you can say, everyone in the biology department gets 500 gigabytes of space and can upload 50 gigabyte files. Everyone in the humanities gets 10 gigabytes of space and 1 gigabyte files. You can then say, well, I want to see that materials subgroup, I want a portal just for them. So I'm going to define a public URL, brand it up very nicely. Everything that I make public will still fall into the bigger university, but it also has this nice smaller portal so you can track the impact of just a group or just a funding code or things like this, a grant code. So I'm going to spend the last 2 minutes talking about why we don't really care if you use figshare for this. We do it great. But if you are going to, if everybody is going to have to build something in this space, you have to make sure that you do a few things to make sure that your stuff is reused and accessible so we can get to that fourth paradigm, so we can go further faster. There's something called data fairport, which is everything needs to be findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. And that's not just for humans, that's for machines too. So you need to make sure that everything's marked up in the right way, everything has an API. Because this is the questions we want to get to with this fourth paradigm of research. We don't care where the data is. We want to be able to say to the internet, give me every spreadsheet data set in CSV format that has these tags from these authors in the last 6 months so I can pull it all together and build on top of it. And I'd say figshare. I don't care where you put the data, but figshare top and center. And so you can pull it all in. One of the other things you can do with that administrative dashboard I was talking about before, as well as saying everybody in biology has this much data space, you can also say everybody in biology also has to use this metadata schema. So then you can start saying things like, I only want to pull stuff through with that metadata schema. It doesn't matter where it lives, as long as I can access it. So all these things need to have APIs. So everyone gets an API. The great things about API is people build cool stuff on top of your stuff. It's not a case of if you build it, they will come, but it's really cool when they do. So we have things like the Wellcome Trust listed all of their APC data, their article processing charge data on figshare. Someone came along and built an app to interrogate that data, which made us look really cool. The Wellcome Trust thought we were doing something nice for them. Just some random guys. But you can see how it plugs into other systems. We plug into GitHub. We have, this is people who, from their machines, the machines finish the experiment and it automatically grabs the metadata and pushes it into their figshare account. It can be kept private, but when you come back in 2 years, and as Tim was talking about, use this file 6 dot, no, actually use this file dot doc. when you go back 2 years later to try and find those files, you can have the metadata captured already. We do work with lots of services like this. That's our ORCID sync as well. People do pick up on stuff. Those citations I was talking about, the Thomson Reuters Data Citation Index, it tracks all the figshare citations already. You can submit to PubMed figshare DOIs. So there's a lot going on, and a lot of people building on top of stuff. Because there's a couple of things that we see that have been problematic in the past. So you need some of the things I've talked about, but persistent identifiers. It'd be great if we had a persistent identifier for everything. So I know, so ORCID is great for people. Digital object identifiers, DOIs are good for objects. Uber has this great stuff regarding grants now. So you can say, this person at this institution created this paper with this data set that was reused by these people, and you can build on top of it. But people don't think they need these persistent identifiers. This is looking at, if you go back 10 years, so in 2009, if you went back to 1999, 52%, that means that 52% of the links to non-traditional research outputs, so the citations to anything that wasn't a paper, are now broken. So you click that link, it doesn't take you anywhere. So you can't reuse that, so you're not getting your credit, you're not getting your citations. And you're like, yeah, but things have changed since then. I mean, who was really looking after this stuff 10 years ago? Well, there's the names of the links that were breaking. So you can see that people move on. People go to a university, people build stuff on top of their university, then they leave. Nobody's there to maintain that stuff. Things break. So there's a real problem there that needs to be addressed with DOIs. I'd also say APIs are essential if you want people to come in and consume your stuff. If you don't have an API, people won't be able to, when they ask that question, hey Google, give me every data set which has these funders, these researchers, these grant codes, these tags, they won't be able to find it because it's not machine readable. I'd say open access is essential for reuse. That's up for debate. And it's all about making sure the university takes control of their stuff, because if the university doesn't take control of this stuff, everybody's going to have to do this. This is going to be the standard for the NIH. I think we could all answer who is going to take control of this stuff if the university doesn't. So that's my talk. Any questions now or at the end? Great.
Does anybody have questions? Yeah.
Sorry. What is Figshare's sustainability model? How do you make sure that not only you have a DOI, but that you're still there to deliver the object?
First and best question every time, because I have an answer. So it's we work with publishers and we work with institutions. So the software for institutions is an annual license fee. We plug it. The things we need are: do you have DOIs already, or do you want us to set them up for your data site? What sign-on systems you use, and what storage you want us to use. The storage is an interesting one, because if you're using your own storage, then we can't guarantee the persistence of that storage. We're currently going for ISO 16363 trusted digital repository. We'll probably be the first. We'll definitely be the first commercial. The World Bank might get there before us in terms of people to get that accreditation, and that makes sure you ask all of the hard questions about where is the data preserved. We were working with clocks. We're now looking at other places that we can be backing up this data. We do have ideas about mirroring the content. If you go to api.figshare.com, you can take a copy of every single public file that's on Figshare. So the publishers we work with who pay for our services as well, we work with Nature, PLOS, Taylor and Francis Wiley. So we visualize a lot of the files in the browser, and apparently publishing systems struggle to visualize all these new academic file formats. But it's a great two-way street, because they say, here's the, we know that in chemistry, these new files are coming through, we need a viewer for that. So we put a viewer on the site, it works for everybody, it works at all the universities as well as all the publishers, and they think we know we're on the hot on the pulse of what all the viewers are on the academic files that people are using.
So from that revenue, are you establishing an endowment, or?
Yeah, there's some things we're looking at. There's a great paper by two people from PLOS and one from Crossref, Jeff Builder, Jennifer Lynn, and Cameron Nayland, who have these 9 points that you should aim for to make sure, and one of them is this slush fund of making sure things can carry on. And I said, well, two of you from PLOS, if we had to PLOS spend extra money in order to go into that fund, would you do it? And they said yes. So it's something we're investigating at the moment. There's other little things like DOIs. We are just a service layer. So the DOIs, we don't own. The data, we don't own. One of the things we have at implementation is how do you get the data out at any point, whether you want it as a feed coming into your university, as a JSON dump coming somewhere. And the DOIs, we don't own, so they're university branded. At the point, if you wanted to take them back, if you want to use another system, we hand the DOIs over to you, and you point them back at wherever your storage is based. The other storage thing there is HIPAA and compliance. So people ask us a lot if we are, and it's something we're looking to do, and then they want to use their own storage, which means we can't tick those boxes. So
do you install your software locally for them to use with their local storage, or do you host the software and somehow you integrate their local? Yeah,
exactly. It's EC2, Amazon Web Services EC2. We can choose specific regions, so it stays at East Coast, West Coast America, Sydney, Dublin, and then we plug into the storage wherever that may be. So the two examples I showed there in Australia, they have RDSI, which is a Australian research cloud. We work with Internet too. We're looking for partners with Jura Cloud. So anybody who has built Jura Cloud storage already, they want to use us as the interface to manage the parts.
Mostly related to the HIPAA and compliance pieces, do you have the ability to have public data sets where there's either licensing or some kind of control of who's asking?
Yeah, the university chooses what licenses it allows its academics to make stuff available under. Again, that can be departmental. You can say that the biology department has these 10 licenses to choose from. But also, as a result, a lot of our stuff has been driven by the funder mandates, which I'd like to point out is not always perfect, but so EPSRC in the UK, they said if 50 terabytes of data lives at CERN, the university is not expected to pull that back in and pay for it again, but they're supposed to have a record for it. So we have, the way you can make files available now is you can always keep files public, make files public and available and downloadable. You can put them under embargo. You can put confidential files that say, we've done this research to tick the funder compliance, but we can't make it available because it's got confidential data or human or economic problems. So you can request to have access to that data at that point. And yeah, that's all been driven by or you can link out to stuff that lives elsewhere. But again, coming back to that question about how do we know that data is going to persist? If you have 50 terabytes at CERN, we can create the metadata record and link out to it and validate there's something on the end of that link. But that's where our responsibilities have to end, right? We can't guarantee that 50 terabytes is going to be there in 10 years. So this is where the funders have some interesting ideas.
All right, so maybe we could save our questions then, if there's further questions for Mark, to the panel discussion. And we do have a afternoon tea. Since we're based in the UK, we have to have our afternoon tea. So we were originally due to come back at 2:30. Why don't we make it 2:35? That gives you about 15 minutes. Fair? We'll try to figure out this microphone thing while you're gone. All right, enjoy your teas. Lauren, are you going to be back now? They're also talking about hello? Hello? Yeah, that's good.
Yeah.